support, unbiased information, and opportunities for collaboration. In fact, we have the honor to work closely with Chairman Wasserberger as well as Representative Northrup, who both serve as commissioners to Education Commission of the states. So we really believe in this power of learning from experience. We help states think through complex problems by utilizing our deep knowledge of research, best practices, and learning from other states to help policymakers make better informed decisions about what might work in their specific state context. So we do this in a variety of ways through research, report, convene, and counsel. We are often invited to talk with groups just like this one to share about what's trending across the states on a certain education policy topic and offer ideas for states to consider. So today we will be hearing from one of our stellar policy staff, Mary Fulton. As a senior policy analyst with ECS, Mary focuses on issues related to post-secondary governance, as well as contributes to other post-secondary education policy projects. Mary brings a wealth of knowledge with more than 20 years of experience with ECS. With that, I will turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Ms. Fulton.
Thank you, Devin. Good morning, Chairman Wasserberger, Chairman Nicholas, and members of the committee. I'm delighted to present to you today on behalf of Education Commission of the States and with my colleagues from WICHE and SHIO. My presentation will focus on a high-level overview of post-secondary governance systems from the state perspective, which hopefully will complement my colleagues' presentations. My presentation draws primarily from a 50-state comparison and policy guide on post-secondary governance structures that Education Commission of the States published in 2019. During my presentation, I will address 4 topics related to post-secondary governance and offer some key takeaways for policy leaders. The topics include state post-secondary governance models, Wyoming's governance system and states with similar structures, primary responsibilities of coordinating and governing boards, and evaluating post-secondary governance systems. Before I discuss the 4 governance models, I would like to offer a few comments. State post-secondary governance plays an important role in the policy and decision-making practice. Let me repeat myself. State post-secondary governance plays an important role in the policy and decision-making processes that affect a state's ability to pursue its education and workforce goals. Post-secondary governance relates to the responsibilities and authority of boards, agencies, institutions, and leadership positions that are charged with developing, implementing, and overseeing policies and programs, and how these various entities and roles are organized. Governance is also about the relationships within and across these boards and agencies, and with legislators, governors, and other key players in the education space. One framework to organize and make sense of the varied and complex governance structures includes the 4 general models listed on the slide. Under Model 1, the 20 states noted on the map have a single statewide coordinating board that is responsible for key aspects of the state's role with public post-secondary institutions, and in some cases, independent colleges. Model 2, in 8 states, a single statewide governing board manages and oversees most functions of the public higher education system and typically has broad authority over institutions. Under Model 3, 19 states, including Wyoming, have 1 or more coordinating or governing boards that oversee institutions within a major post-secondary system. These states do not have a single statewide coordinating or governing board. And finally, Model 4. In 11 states and the District of Columbia, post-secondary administrative agencies oversee a variety of programs and services for institutions. 8 of these states also fall under Model 3 because they have administrative offices that are separate from post-secondary system offices. For example, Minnesota has 2 major systems and a state higher education office. A few notes about the models. Michigan does not have a statewide board or agency or a major system-wide board, and therefore does not fall under any of the governance models. Rhode Island and Utah recently reformed their structures, and they now fall under different models than ECS identified in our 2019 publications. While I discussed the state and major system level boards, other post-secondary systems and institutions often have their own governing boards. While I recognize that you are familiar with your own state's governance system, I wanted to show how Wyoming fits within these 4 models. As mentioned above, Wyoming falls under Model 3, since the Community College Commission is a system-wide coordinating board for the 7 colleges, which also have boards of trustees. The University of Wyoming is a single campus governed by the Board of Trustees and is not considered a post-secondary system. I also wanted to place Wyoming in the context of other states with similar structures. 8 of the 19 states in Model 3 have separate community college systems. 3 of these states have community college system level coordinating boards: Mississippi, West Virginia, and Wyoming. 5 of these states have community college system level governing boards: California, Florida, New Hampshire, Florida, Maine, New Hampshire, and North Carolina. Community colleges in the remaining states under Model 3 are either part of a 4- and 2-year system or are not part of a system. In this next section, I'd like to talk about primary responsibilities of coordinating and governing boards. Statewide and system-wide coordinating and governing boards often share several primary responsibilities, including to approve, advise, appoint, develop, recommend, and review. The specific responsibilities related to these actions can vary by state and by board and can change over time. Over the next few slides, I will mention some of the common responsibilities for these boards and ones more likely associated with the different types of boards. So this list does not represent all the common responsibilities. And as mentioned above, they can vary by boards within states. And while all board responsibilities are important, their roles with respect to appointing leaders, recommending budget requests, and reviewing and approving new academic programs can have wide-reaching implications. Coordinating boards are more likely to have the roles listed on this slide, although governing boards also may be involved in these activities. Governing boards are more likely to have the roles listed on this slide, although coordinating boards also may be involved in some of these activities. The last topic section addresses evaluating governance systems. State and system leaders periodically consider and sometimes adopt minor to significant changes to their governance structures. So I would like to offer some thoughts for leaders who may want to consider reforming their governance systems. State and system leaders may have their eyes on reforming governance systems before clearly articulating and agreeing on a purpose and pathway for doing so. Most often, The primary focus should be on achieving education and workforce goals, and then determining whether governance changes would support these efforts. It is helpful for state leaders to clearly articulate core problems that they are trying to address and determine whether they are primarily related to governance and/or other issues. For example, the core problems might center on funding levels and policies. If related to governance and possibly one or more other issues, state leaders have two basic options: reform the governance structure or work within the governance structure. It can be tempting for state and system leaders to turn to reorganizing their governance systems to resolve problems. Well,
Mr. Chairman, your mic is on and it's interfering.
My mic is on.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, still shows us on. I don't know. Thank you.
Are we set? Great. So let me repeat that last bullet because there may have been some interference. So it can be tempting for state and system leaders to turn to reorganizing their governance systems to resolve problems. While major reforms might be warranted in some cases, those of us who keep an eye on post-secondary governance typically suggest that leaders take time to articulate the core problems, explore the options for addressing these problems, and try to evaluate the implications of any proposed reforms. Ideally, as a first step, state leaders will examine how any core problems could be addressed through the current governance system. State leaders might want to consider the following questions. Should you review and possibly revise existing roles and authorities of boards and agencies? Would stronger collaboration across boards and institutions resolve some issues? For example, this might be a way to address any barriers related to sharing and reporting data. Are there other strategies or policies that state leaders could adopt? Finally, I would like to offer some takeaways for state leaders based on my presentation. While states fall within governance models, no two states have the same structure, and most are complicated and complex. There is not an ideal governance structure, and therefore a system should align with the state's context and support its goals. While the roles of coordinating and governing boards can vary by state and may change over time, the boards typically share several common responsibilities. And while sometimes reforming governance structures is a good option, ideally state leaders will first try to work within their current system to address core issues. I listed and provided links to our post-secondary governance resources from 2019. One note, we are updating the 50-state comparison, which is scheduled for release in mid-November. I hope my remarks have provided a helpful and informative high-level overview of post-secondary governance, and I'm sure my WICHE and SHIO colleagues will provide additional information and insights. Chairman Wasserberger and Nicholas, I would be happy to try to answer any questions from you and the committee members. Thank you.
Okay, questions by the committee for Ms. Fulton and Ms. Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bebout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mary and Devin, I really appreciate your presentation. I have two questions. The one question is, like in Wyoming, or particularly now we have this huge revenue shortfalls that we have. You know, it looks, we really have three competing groups for the available dollars. We have the community college with the commission. We have the Board of Trustees of our only university. And of course, we have the K through 12 education situation. And when you look at the overall, at least in my opinion, it looks like the community colleges rank third in that in terms of availability to get these existing funds. So what do other states do that have these competing different entities and not only, K through 12, but post-secondary for limited dollars? And how do they address that? And that gets into the next thing is some of them have one board, and then that board will sit there and allocate money. And of course, you're going to have the argument from all the other three that gets rid of the public input, and they have a huge power situation where they dictate. How does that all fit out in terms of competing for limited dollars with these three different entities? K through 12, and then post-secondary, the community college system, and our university.
Chairman
Ms.
Wasserberger,
Fulton?
and I apologize. Yes, Chairman Wasserberger and Senator Bebout, that is a wonderful question. I will admit that some of the finance issues are out of my wheelhouse. Perhaps another one of my colleagues from WICHE or SHIO is in a better position to respond to that question. Yet it's not uncommon. There are these competing, systems and agendas in every state, between K-12 and post-secondary, and certainly in post-secondary, the different sectors, with community colleges and four-year institutions. And some of that might depend, excuse me, once again, on that governance structure, where in Wyoming, you have a separate community college system and then a single, four-year institution. That can set up, some different dynamics, where in other states, there is maybe a little bit more of a blend. You have systems that comprise of four-year and two-year systems or institutions. And so this kind of plays out in different ways in different states, depending not only on the governance system, also the authority of some of these boards to actually allocate the funds. In some states, the legislators directly allocate funds to institutions. Sometimes it's run through boards. And so that can vary by state. It's not uncommon, yet I think I'd like to defer a more specific answer to my colleagues who will come after me. Thank you.
And Ms. Fulton, I guess my question would be, this is Chairman Wasserberger. Of the states that Wyoming is using the same higher education governance system, which state would you after you've done your research, would you suggest would be the model state of those, I think, 13 states or so? Which one would have maybe the best statutes and the best governing system of those that we are a member of?
Chairman Wasserberger, yes, so there are 19 states that fall under that Model 3, along with Wyoming. I hesitate to answer, it's a great question, and we receive this all the time from legislators and other policymakers, because everyone wants to know, what's that ideal governance system? Some states have it set up in a more effective or efficient way. And unfortunately, it's really hard to answer that question. I think because some of the comments I was referencing, that the system really has to fit your context and your history, your population and demographics, your political system. And so what might work in North Carolina, you certainly can't transfer into Wyoming, or, from Arizona into Wyoming. We can learn some lessons from each state. And I think one issue that, we struggle with as, policy analysts and researchers is figuring out what criteria you base that evaluation on to determine how governance systems are working. And that, one reason is because they are not in a vacuum of their own. They are influenced by all other kinds of policies, leadership, changes in leadership, all of those relationships that I mentioned. And so I think what's important is for state leaders and the folks in a particular state kind of work, sometimes with outside consultants to really examine what is happening in your own state, in Wyoming. And are things working as you hope? Are the parts of the governance system that are perhaps kind of hindering some of the goals or objectives or some of the programs and practices from carrying out as desired? So a lot of times it's, we can learn from other states and we can certainly connect you with leaders in other states that have a similar structure if you want to kind of talk with them and learn from them. But ultimately it comes down to what is best for Wyoming and what works for Wyoming.
Well, Ms. Fulton, thank you very much for that answer. Essentially what you said was that Wyoming needs to create a system that's unique for our 7 community colleges and to base that on the future of our state and what our workforce needs are and to move forward. Okay, any further questions by the committee? Anybody on Zoom that has a question?
Chairman?
I'd like to thank Ms. Fulton and Ms. Scott for their presentation. And I have enjoyed being the Education Commission of the State's Commissioner. Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is very similar to Senator Bebout's. I think that Wyoming in general has a pretty good governance system. It's allowed to focus on local community needs. Western Wyoming Community College is much different than Torrington Community College or Eastern. But I struggle with what is the best word, but I think as a legislator, I'm frustrated that there isn't as much collaboration between the 7 community colleges and the commission, K-12 and the university. Does, in your observing all these other different governance systems, is there a, doesn't have to be a silver bullet, I'll accept brass, that the legislature can promote more collaboration, cooperation between these institutional entities? Thank you.
Chairman Wassenberger and
Ms. Fulton?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Chairman Wassenberger and Representative Freeman. Once again, a spot on question. And in one of my slides, when I was talking about working within your governance system, you hit on exactly one of my bullets. Could stronger collaboration across, the institutions, the boards, the agencies, as well as K-12, help, with resolve some issues, whether it's, the data sharing, whether it's making decisions, whether it's, transfer, whether it's understanding some of the workforce needs. And so once again, this is doable. And also I think within Wyoming, for the legislators and some of the leaders of, at the commission, at the university and with the college campuses, to really kind of, join forces and say, what would work in Wyoming for greater collaboration, and how can we either set up some informal structure to do so, and probably give that structure some kind of clear charge, because we've seen in other states that have set up, preschool to 16 councils, that can work really well. However, if there's not kind of a clear charge and some commitment and a purpose, those kind of fall apart. And so once again, saying, where are those opportunities for collaboration? Where are we kind of missing, some of those spots? And can we put together even an informal, structure to have those conversations and maybe have more of those conversations and resolve some of those issues without it really having to, disrupt the current governance system. Plus, as you mentioned, these, especially the community colleges, they're very in tune with their local community. and the local businesses and residents. And so how could that be brought to bear? So, that's one option, is to think of some type of, informal structure within your current governance system that can certainly promote more collaboration.
Okay, further questions? Okay, further questions by the committee. How is the sound out there? Senator Anselmi Dalton, how is that for you now?
Let me call you right back.
Sounds getting better. Sometimes it takes a little bit, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Senator, I couldn't hear you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Sometimes, I don't know why, but in general, it's pretty good from Mary Ann Devon. Thanks, ladies.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any further questions for Ms. Fulton?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one more.
And moving on,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
I got
Bebout.
one more. Hello, Jeff.
Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have, and of course, one of the governors that you look at is you have a mega board, if you will. I think Colorado has that board of regents is in charge of everything. I believe they're elected, and there's always pros and cons, but when you've looked at these different states, have you ever done an analysis on the administrative costs that even become close to justification for one single board? We have a lot of, most of it are good people that do it as public service, so the costs are not very high in terms of the public participation, but the actual governance structure of it, have you done any comparison in the cost analysis on the administrative side for expense purposes? Thank you.
Ms. Fulton or Ms. Scott?
Mr. Chairman Wasserberger and Senator Bebout, another good question. No, Education Commission of the States has not conducted an analysis on the administrative costs. Sometimes that's kind of hard to identify in various states. My colleague, David Tamberg, might have some more specific answers. SHIO, I think, has collected some information on administrative costs. And one issue is how you define administrative costs, which can vary from state to state, from board to board. It is kind of a very legitimate question when you have different layers of the governance. In Colorado, for example, we do have the Colorado Department of Education. We have the Colorado Commission on Higher Education, which is a statewide coordinating board over all the institutions. And then Senator Bebout, I think what you were referring to is the Board of Regents for the University of Colorado, which are elected. And that's a very uncommon practice actually across the country. Unfortunately, I do not have a specific answer for your question. Once again, my colleague David Tamberg might have a little more information. Thank you.
Any further questions? Any further questions by the committee? Okay, I think we're ready to move on. We are to the next spot in our agenda, which is Regional Governance Practices by Desmarais Michelot. And she is with the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, which everybody knows as WICHE. So, Ms. Michelot.
Good morning, Senator Wasserberger and Representative Nicholas and members of the committee. I am just double checking my screen here to make sure that I can see everybody and have it. Can you see my screen, sir?
So always keep this laptop muted, the mic, okay, and then only.
Quick check, can everybody see my screen and my slides? We good? Great, thank you. Good morning, Senator Wasserberger, Representative Nicholas, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today, and I do hope that my remarks are helpful to you as you explore national and regional governance and funding practices for community college systems in the context of Wyoming. My name is Demi Michelot, and I'm the president of the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, or WICHE. And many of you have known WICHE and worked with us for a long time, but I do want to provide a bit of background for those of you who may not be as familiar with us or our work. I admit, Senator Wasserberger, I fear that you may be sick of me by the end of this week, because we've seen each other a bit in the last few weeks, and you may see more of me in the next few, but be that as it may, WICHE is an interstate compact of the 15 Western states and plus the US Pacific territories and freely associated states. And what that means is that we also have Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands as members. WICHE was formed by the Western governors 67 years ago, and Wyoming and WICHE have a longstanding partnership that dates back to 1953. I was not there then, but we were founded on the basis of interstate collaboration and resource sharing, and I firmly believe that those principles are even more important today. The map that you see here is a visual representation of the WICHE West, and you'll see that our region covers a very large geographical range from North Dakota to Guam. This map is not to scale. That's impossible on a PowerPoint slide, but I just would like you to note that the region is just incredibly diverse in terms of geography, demographics, political leanings, economies, etc. Our mission is quite straightforward. We work collaboratively to expand educational access and excellence for all citizens of the West, and we do that through promoting innovation, cooperation, resource sharing, and public policy and sound public policy. I've been asked here today to provide some additional context to Ms. Fulton's remarks, and specifically around governance. And so as context, before I do that, I just suggest the following as challenges to higher education in Wyoming. And to be clear, most of these are not challenges that you face alone, but they are challenges nonetheless. And I think it's important to get them out on the table as we go forward. There are demands to increase post-secondary attainment rates and to close gaps for students who are being left behind. There's an expectation to keep higher education affordable for our students and for our families. There's pressure to produce graduates with skills that are aligned with the current economy and future jobs. And the reality is that we don't know what many of those jobs are going to be in the coming years. And here in Wyoming, there's perhaps more now than ever, pressure to diversify and avoid heavy reliance on volatile oil and gas prices, and to innovate and respond to new industries. And higher education is expected to achieve all of this at a lower cost to the system in the context of changing demographics, which today in most states really means fewer people and more diverse populations. And now there's a pandemic that is laid on top of all of this, and that creates uncertainty for our students, for our economies, our campus communities, et cetera. And this may sound bleak, but I do believe that you also have an incredible opportunity here. And Wyoming has a long history of being very thoughtful in its policy development. The state is incredibly resilient, and the processes that the state is undertaking right now reflect a deep commitment to its values, its people, and its future. As I said, my role in this hearing is to provide additional context to the overall higher education governance picture that Ms. Fulton provided. And I just want to acknowledge she has done excellent work in this area. I rely on it all the time, and it's a pleasure to present with her today. And I just want to thank her for providing this foundation. This slide is a very quick and far less beautiful summary of her work as a reminder. And I want to acknowledge some previous work that was done in the state back in 1999. And for those of you who read the 1999 legislative study on community college governance, you do know that back then there were no two states that had the exact same governance structure. And you also know that there was no one best way to approach governance. And you heard that from Ms. Fulton today, and that stands true. Many of the lessons and themes from that report have stood the test of time. And I'm pleased to say that Wyoming has been on a thoughtful evolution. It's well documented, and it's gotten us to where we are today. So before I really get started, and this came out in the Q&A part of the last presentation, but a frequent question that I'm asked, and Ms. Fulton was asked, is which governance structure is best or leads to the best outcomes? And there really is no answer to that. And little research exists on the relationship between higher education governance structures and specific outcomes, such as completions or any other student outcomes. But I will say that what little has been done either by or in partnership with Dr. David Tamberg, who you will hear from, and obviously after me. So I won't even begin to attempt to cite his research. He knows that I have that rule that I don't cite his research when he's presenting with me. But the point in that is that there really is no magic governance structure that's going to solve all the problems a particular state may be facing. And so just if I can convey anything, just understand there are trade-offs, there are pros and cons, and many considerations. And so hopefully with our collective presentations today, that will help give you some real food for thought in what those considerations are. In the following slides, what I hope will be helpful is to give a broad overview of some state examples, kind of dig a little deeper into what my colleague presented. And these state examples differ in size and scope, and hopefully give you a sense of the various approaches. And again, no state model can just be brought and plopped into another state and be effective, but there are indeed lessons to be learned from how other states approach different matters. And I chose to focus on Alaska, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona because number one, they're in the West. And number two, they highlight some important advantages and disadvantages of various models. I have put them roughly in order from most centralized to least centralized. It's not a kind of a perfect summary, but that gives you a sense of where I'm going. So I'll start with Alaska. Alaska is a very small state in terms of population with about 732,000 people, kind of on par with Wyoming, but it's very large in terms of landmass. And I cannot emphasize enough how challenging it is to serve the remote parts of that state. Many areas are accessible by only plane or boat and not accessible at all in the winter months. So it creates incredible challenges for higher education to try to serve students in those very remote areas. Currently, they have one institutional governing board, which is an appointed board of regents, and it oversees 3 university campuses and several community colleges. And back in 1987, in response to a state fiscal crisis, the University of Alaska underwent a very significant restructuring in an effort to reduce operating expenditures. And the goal back then was specifically to save money. The key components of this change were to consolidate the community colleges under the state's 3 universities, so consolidation, to combine faculty across the largest campuses, and to eliminate over 100 administrative positions. The system credits those decisions with generating about $6 million at the time in savings. So in 2018 dollars, that's about $13 million. And it improved articulation between the community colleges and the universities and prevented cuts to academic programs and faculty. However, and this is where the trade-off comes in, they created other challenges and through the consolidation that they felt later on. And you may have heard about Alaska in the news in the last few years, where they have faced severe budget cuts and funding challenges to the point that they've declared financial exigency. They have been able to walk back from that and come to an agreement with the governor for a phased approach to the cuts. But this past June, they, at their Board of Regents meeting, they eliminated 40 programs and still are working to find ways to overcome the serious fiscal crisis in which they find themselves. So the story is still unfolding. It will continue to unfold in Alaska, but it's an example of, one decision leads to, maybe some certain outcomes at the point of the decision, but then may lead to different outcomes down the line. that you may or may not be happy with. Next, I'll turn to Montana, and Montana has just over 1 million people, and it has a state level governing board with an appointed board of regents. And the Montana university system has 2 universities, and those universities oversee 4 regional comprehensive 4 regional comprehensive institutions, and then 7 community and technical colleges. They have kind of an interesting system because they also have independent 2-year institutions with a dual governance structure. And in that structure, the governance responsibilities are split between the Board of Regents and locally elected boards of trustees for each independent community college. So the university system is quite centralized, with the Board of Regents having constitutional power and authority over the university system and supervision and coordination over other public educational institutions. And they seem to have found a balance between identifying and acting on a state agenda while responding to local needs and interests. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but that's one of the tensions that you need to consider when you're thinking about governance, that tension between the state agenda and the local agenda as well. So Colorado was mentioned, and I want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page with how Colorado is structured, because I think it's actually quite complicated. They are a state, and somebody mentioned early on that nobody knows where anybody is. I'll just mention I'm in Colorado right now, coming to you from Zoom. Colorado is a state of about 5.6 million people, so much larger than the state of Wyoming. And the structure is quite a bit more complex. They have a state level coordinating board, and all public institutions in Colorado are coordinated by an appointed commission. And that's the Colorado Commission on Higher Education that Ms. Fulton mentioned. And there's one system governing board that's an elected board of regents, which is the University of Colorado system, and they have 4 campuses. That interesting twist is that elected board. That's not all that common. It happens. It adds a whole different type of element, we'll say, when you have an elected Board of Regents. The Colorado State University system is, on the other hand, a governing board with an appointed board of governors, and they have 3 campuses. So like you're familiar with the CSU at Fort Collins, for instance. They also have Global Campus and CSU Pueblo. There are 7 public colleges and universities with local governing boards, and each 4-year institution has an appointed board of trustees. So hopefully you're kind of still with me, and it's on this slide, but this is, as I said, it's quite a bit more complicated. And then the community colleges have a Colorado Community College system with a governing board called the State Board for Community Colleges and Occupational Education, which is appointed. And if that isn't enough, they also have 2 local district colleges with locally elected boards of trustees that are outside of that Colorado community college system, Ames Community College and Colorado Mountain College. So since the state higher education executive officer is appointed by the governor and a member of the cabinet, it's an interesting structure to also have that commission that has the authority for the Colorado Department of Higher Education that also has quite a bit of authority. So it's an interesting system with a lot of pushes and pulls and tensions there that is not as straightforward as somebody who may be just looking at it thinking, oh, they have a coordinating board. And they do, but there are a lot of dynamics within the system that are worth considering. And I want to take a pause on Colorado for a minute. And this is going to seem a little off topic, but Mr. Swank had mentioned in preparation for these remarks that the committee is also interested in how the colleges can help support or steer economic and workforce development priorities of the state. And so it's a little bit of a tangent, but I do want to just provide 2 examples. And one example is in Colorado that the committee may be interested in. As you know, the two-year institutions play a dual role in that they prepare students for transfer to a four-year institution so that those students eventually can enter the workforce. But they also prepare students to go into the workforce directly from the two-year college. And that's completely oversimplifying it, as they also provide retraining and upskilling and adult basic education and all sorts of different functions. But I paused on Colorado because they have launched the Colorado Collegiate Apprenticeship Program that I thought was an interesting example that kind of gets at your question from before. And basically, it is a statewide apprenticeship program. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Labor and administered by the Colorado Department of Higher Education, but it's in partnership with local colleges and universities. The goal is to create more than 6,000 collegiate apprenticeships by the summer of 2024. And it's employer driven, it's a form of experiential learning. So it's on the job training for a paid employee with related classroom instruction. And it's an example of how the state is just having a very deliberate workforce and economic development type effort. And I want to put that out there as one example that I hope gets at that. And then the second example that I want to bring to your attention is a program in North Dakota called TrainND. It's North Dakota's workforce training network. And it was legislatively designed, so it's not a US Department of Labor funded effort, but it was legislative in nature. And the idea is that it provides business and industry with one point of contact for training needs. So businesses can basically develop their internal talent through the use of TrainND. They work with business and industry to provide an assessment to determine the organizational needs. And then by partnering with the colleges, they provide courses and build a program that's right for those employees and employers. And if you're interested in learning more about those two or other types of programs like that, and if I got at your question, which I hope I did, I can either dig deeper or connect you with those folks directly. And I will resume where I was, and I hope that was helpful and not annoying. So moving to Arizona, Arizona often gets attention, and I wanted to bring them into the presentation for a number of reasons. Not only their governance structure, but because of some developments that had happened there a few years ago that may be relevant to your thinking. Arizona has about 7.3 million people, so it's a fairly large state for the West. They have 3 universities, and those universities are overseen by a governing board with an appointed board of regents. The community colleges, however, kind of like the Wild West a little bit there. They're locally governed by elected boards of governors, and there are 10 community college districts. There is no coordinating or governing entity over the community colleges. The State Board for Community Colleges was dissolved back in 2000. They do have a voluntary coordinating council, but it doesn't have authority. It really is primarily a lobbying function type organization. So Arizona, and this is the story I want to share with you that hopefully will help with your thinking, but they often get attention because back in 2015, they completely cut state support for 2 of their largest community college districts, Maricopa and Pima. And there's some key things to note about this. And I hope this also dovetails nicely into Dr. Tamberg's remarks. But when that was happening, and if you were aware of that happening, the story was, oh, they cut support for community colleges in Arizona. It really was their largest community college districts. So they only zeroed out Maricopa and Pima. They never changed anything in statute, and they just didn't fully fund the formula. And the rural colleges were not affected when that happened. So they do have an equalization formula that helps the rural colleges, and that's important in how it played out. The reality was that Maricopa in particular could weather that storm. The county alone has 4.5 million people. And if you recall, that's over 50% of the total state population. That's where all the people are. And where the second most populated county is Pima. So there's a tax base, particularly in those areas where the money could be drawn, and in Maricopa in particular. But what that did, though, is it left a reliance on property taxes and tuition. And in Arizona, it's not popular to raise taxes, so that the property tax increase was not politically viable at all. And any increase in tuition, which at that time, even a small increase of $5 in tuition negatively impacted enrollment there. So what they ended up doing was looking at targeted investments. So they only went to the legislature with very specific requests, and that's how they were able to recapture some of the state dollars over time. But one can argue, and why I'm sharing this is, one could argue that it was smart and kind of got them through the crisis, but that was probably not an ideal long-term solution, and it ultimately wasn't. They've somewhat recovered, but another lesson to think about in that story is that even when there was an appetite for reinvesting back into Maricopa and Pima, because their formula was enrollment based, if Maricopa and Pima would have insisted on implementing the formula before they had enough dollars, it would have shut down at least one of the rural colleges. And that's because they did not have that coordinating body to think about it as a whole. But what they did have was they had leadership at those colleges who could look at it. So it took that coordination and leadership at the college level, but in some ways they lucked out, right? Because if they didn't have that and Maricopa and Pima would have gone after the dollars, that could have happened in that case. And so I just want to emphasize that, because I've heard that from the Arizona leaders, that they felt that in some ways they were able to weather that storm, but it could have gone in a different way. So my final state that I just want to highlight is New Mexico. And New Mexico, it has arguably one of the most decentralized systems in the country, and they have a population of just over 2 million people. So it's not that big, but they have 31 higher education institutions. So in some ways, it's sort of mind-boggling. They have 21 independent governing boards and 10 advisory boards. And that proliferation of institutions occurred when New Mexico had fewer than 1 million people. So if you can think, and they have about 122,000 square miles. So if you can think about Wyoming with what is the range about 600,000 people, imagine that many institutions in your state. I mean, it's really kind of hard to imagine at that time. The state has 3 research universities, 4 comprehensive institutions, and each institution is independently governed by a gubernatorially appointed Senate-confirmed Board of Regents. At the 2-year level, there are 7 independent community colleges and 10 branch community colleges. And then the independent community colleges each have a locally elected board from within the district, but the branches are governed by their parent institution's Board of Regents, even though they have a locally elected advisory board. It should be acknowledged, they do rely heavily on associations like the Council of University Presidents, for example, to help with information sharing, collaboration, and that type of work, but they don't really have authority. And the higher education department really lacks authority as well. It's led by a secretary of higher education who's appointed by the governor and a member of her cabinet, but the system is really, as I mentioned, decentralized. And so they've had challenges establishing a statewide agenda for higher education. And so often those gaps, that void that is left, is filled through legislative action, governor's initiatives, or sometimes it can't be filled from a state perspective. So it's just kind of an example of where the pendulum is swinging. So, oops, sorry, I went too far. As I said, there are important considerations, and this echoes a lot of what Ms. Fulton had said earlier, but there are a lot of important considerations that you have to balance as you make choices around governance. And hopefully I've illustrated this through these examples. And none of these are either or, but the trick is really to find the system that gives your state and institutions that proper balance for the benefit of your students and your communities and your state. The first consideration relates to the balance between being able to serve a statewide agenda versus institutional needs. What's good for the state is not always what the institutions need or want, and vice versa. The sum of the parts don't always equal a whole, so striking that balance where it doesn't fall too heavily on one side or the other is important. Statewide needs are not always the same as regional needs, and vice versa. So again, just finding that balance. But one thing that I'll just point out is, legislators are often in the unique position of having to not only represent their constituency, but also think about the big picture from a state perspective. So you understand this tension probably better than anybody in the state because you're put in this position every day. And there's also a trade-off between statewide planning versus institutional flexibility. So if you're interested in, for instance, increasing efficiency among programs, it might be more difficult in a very decentralized system. And then another point that I don't think has gotten mentioned just yet, but I want to just put this in your thinking caps is, how do you want your institutions working with you? My experience, and I think my colleagues would echo, is that when an institution or institutions can run to the legislature in an uncoordinated way, legislators tend to get frustrated and institutions often end up turning on each other, and very rarely is anyone happy in those scenarios. So ensuring that you continue to dial that in a way that's effective is key to a functioning system. And then I'm going to go through this fast. And you will hear from Dr. Tamberg, but this sort of gets at a question that was raised earlier. And given that Wyoming, like the rest of the region, is in a fiscal crisis, I just want to drive home the point that is essential to think about around financing decisions. But it's important to think about these decisions in an aligned way. And so here you see an illustration of this. But what I mean is that appropriations, tuition setting, and financial aid really are all part of a three-legged stool, and they're all interdependent. So, for instance, if you reduce appropriations, tuition is likely to increase. So how does that impact financial aid? And ultimately, what does that do to students? So my point in this slide is really that governance impacts these key finance decisions. And so as you consider governance in the context of finance, alignment is your friend, and thinking ahead in how any decisions you make may affect the finance decisions. So I will close with just highlighting the specific considerations that you may want to consider as you continue to work through this committee. It's critical to ask yourself, what is your goal and why are you doing what you're doing? Be sure to just solve the problem you have and not apply someone else's solution to your problem. All governance change is not the same, and there are varying degrees of it. So I think a lot of what we were talking about here today is more of the big governance change type work, but sometimes there are tweaks that may make sense and won't create upheaval, but just keep in mind that the sweeping governance change is expensive. It takes a long time, and sometimes it creates other problems, and it may or may not solve the problem you initially had. So really being clear about what you're trying to accomplish is incredibly important. And there just are often options within your structure that can get you where you want to be with fewer headaches, and to make sure that you really thoroughly think some of those through. It's often worth the time to carefully explore those options before moving forward in sweeping change. And I can't emphasize this enough, but this echoes Ms. Fulton, but we clearly agree on this, but ensure that whatever you do is properly aligned with the state's history, values, and needs. As I mentioned in my opening, Wyoming has been very, very thoughtful in how the state has gotten to where it is today, and continuing that is advisable. And trying to apply something that works great elsewhere but doesn't quite fit in your context will likely lead to frustration and be challenging. And then finally, governance just doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's clear that the committee is recognizing that. So whatever you do with governance impacts elements of your finance policy, and just, thinking about how you can promote alignment are key questions that, can be part of your calculus that will lead to success later on. So with that, I conclude my remarks, and I'm available to respond to questions. And I thank the committee for your time, and thank you, Senator Wasserberger.
Thank you, Ms. Michelot. I want to thank you again for an outstanding presentation. And at this time, I would open it up to the committee for questions. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Ms. Michelot, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you for that presentation. I thought it was outstanding. And I want to go back to Arizona for just a moment, because I thought your comments regarding coordination and being careful with how you go about any changes was spot on. But down there, it seems to me that without a coordinating process, that sort of developed on its own. I mean, it sounds like maybe the presidents got together from all the community colleges. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how did policy get to the legislative level if it didn't come through a governing process? And did that sort of develop on its own in an informal way?
So with that specific example, oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Michelot.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I apologize. Zoom sometimes throws me off. I thank you for the question. And to clarify, you are referring to that specific example of the 2015 and what happened with that situation.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, sure. I mean, that's one, but I think in an overall way, I'm just curious, how does policy percolate to the legislative level out of a disparate sort of set of community colleges that don't have a governing process? Have they developed their own governing process outside of structure?
Ms. Michelot.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, so they do have the coordinating council that primarily has a lobbying function, and that is one of the ways that they have tried to address that, because as I understand it, as I mentioned in my remarks, folks get frustrated if everybody's all over the place. It's time consuming and inefficient from that perspective. And so that coordinating council was formed, and the institutions, they actually have a staff person, I think one staff person now, and the institutions pay into that based on FTE, size of their institution. And then that helps coordinate that piece of it. In the specific example that I gave, my understanding from talking to the folks in Arizona was that the presidents of Maricopa and Pima at the time really just got together, were strategic, and understood full well that if they insisted on that formula being fully funded, that would have a negative impact on at least one of the rural colleges, and they did not want to see the demise of one of their colleges. And why I use that example, I think I said this, but just to emphasize, is it's one of those situations where it was great they had that leadership there, but we've all seen situations where if a different leader is there, they may not think that way, or it could go in a different direction that could have had pretty big impacts for a community or in the state.
Further questions by the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about, the different mechanisms out there and the funding levels. And in Wyoming, and these are approximations, I was just running them through my mind, is that for our one university, we spend about $44,000 a year per student. And then on our community college system, we might spend around 10 or 12 or $13,000 per student. Have you seen any comparisons or any other numbers? Are we in line with the amount of money we spend on a student at the university versus what I consider a lack of spending on our community colleges? Or are we pretty much in line on our ratios? It's 300% more per student at the university than at our community colleges.
Ms. Michelot.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, thank you for the question. I think this is the largely part of the topic of Dr. Tamberg's presentation is the funding piece of this. I'm going to ask David Tamberg to just nod at me if that makes sense. Okay, thank you. I think he's probably better equipped to be specific and more informative on the answer.
Further questions by the
Thank you,
committee?
sir.
Okay, the chair would like to recognize, we did have Senator Michael Von Flattern here for about the last 2 hours, and I failed to recognize him, but I did want to let the committee know that Senator Von Flattern was here, and he just left a few minutes ago, and I was going to recognize him at the end of Ms. Michelot's presentation, and so he beat me out the door, but he has been here. Okay. Next up, is it time for a break? Yes, Chairman. You ready for a break? Sure, always. Okay, we will take let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10:01, and we will move on to Mr. David Tamberg from SHIELD. Minutes past 10, and we do have just an incredible welcoming committee here at Gillette College, and they have provided a break room with all kinds of goodies, and some of the legislators are up there partaking in just incredible pastries that were made here on campus. And so we will go ahead and get started. At this point, are there any further questions for Ms. Mikulau? And I think we are ready to move on. The next on our agenda is Community College Funding Practices, and Mr. David Tanberg, who is Senior Vice President of Policy Research and Strategic Initiatives, State Higher Education Executive Officers, or which is formerly called SHIO. So Mr. Tanberg.
Thank you so much, Chairman. To the chairmen and to the members of the committee, thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. I'm going to try and get my presentation going here. Let's see. Okay, can you see my slides? Yeah, thank you so much. It's indeed an honor to be invited to participate in this committee considerations, and I want to commend you on the thoughtful and deliberative approach you're taking to your considerations and to seeking answers to these very important questions. I thought I would provide some insights into the organization where I work. As the chairman indicated, we're the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. And so as Ms. Fulton and Dr. Mikulau talked about state governance structures, those entities, the systems, the agencies, they're our membership. They're who we represent. They're the chief executive officers of statewide governing policy and coordinating boards. And we seek to be an advocate for state policy leadership, to act as a liaison between states and the federal government, provide information, research, analysis. And one thing that we really emphasize is that state context matters when it comes to higher education policy, politics, and governance. And seeing as how the entities that Dr. Mikulau and Ms. Fulton discussed are our members, I thought I'd emphasize a couple points before I get into my discussion of finance. There were questions around Arizona and their approach, and also Ms. Fulton pointed out that Michigan lacks a state governing or coordinating board. And there are some real risks to moving away from a coordinated approach to state policy and governance. And one of them is that these agencies and systems act as internal state higher education experts for the government, right? They're a consistent presence and offer critical expertise within their states. Where such an entity doesn't exist, we tend to see, and the research supports, that the price to student generally goes up as the institutions seek to maximize their own interests, okay? And one role of our membership is to look out for the state's interests relative to the institution's interests. You also tend to see that there isn't a single entity for policy proposals, implementation, and evaluation. And you could see some of the real risks to not having such an entity play out in Arizona. And so I want to emphasize the critical role that they play within the states. So I was actually asked to talk about finance, and so I'll shift focus there. One thing I'll point out, I'm a little bit shamed by Ms. Fulton and Dr. Mikulau in that you will see a decline in sophistication of the PowerPoints from Ms. Fulton to Dr. Mikulau to me. And so bear with me. So I have quite a bit of information on the slides. I'll submit most of it for your consideration later. I won't read everything that I've written. But as you see on this slide, resources and state funding really matters within higher education. We know that states have the primary legal authority and responsibility for education, K-12 through post-secondary, as outlined in the US Constitution. States have a real interest in higher education. Our public higher education systems are funded and governed under the premise that they can advance the state's interests and advance the greater public good within the state. One thing that Dr. Michelou pointed out that I like to say also is that the sum of the individual campus interests does not necessarily equal the state's interests, that left unto themselves, they won't fully realize the state's interest or the greater public good. You all and the commission have a critical role in ensuring that the higher education institutions within your states are meeting your needs, the needs of the citizens. And public financing of higher ed is one tool with which you can ensure that that happens. Because it ensures a greater level of public accountability. Without some adequate level of state funding, it would be very difficult to get the institutions to operate fully in the state's interest. State funding also provides some level of consistent equalizing funding across local areas. And also makes up for a lack of funding capacity that we often see in localities. And so there's a critical role when we think about community college finance of having some level of state support, even if there's local support, right? The more we localize funding of any public interest, generally we see an increase in inequality in funding. And that's why state level funding is one reason state level funding is so important. We also know that research that increased state support equals better outcomes. And this has been a point of research that's really increased in the last several years. You'll notice some of my citations are from 2017, 18, 20. There's been an increased interest in this from economists, public policy scholars, and higher ed scholars. And we generally see an increase in funding equals increased enrollments, more completions, return on investment, and the like. And I won't go into each of these studies, but these are well-designed quasi-experimental studies that are showing a fairly tight alignment between funding and outcomes. How does it work that way? Well, we generally see that when appropriations dependent institutions, and so these are community colleges and regional public four-year institutions, when they see an increase in state resources coming into their institution, they direct that money towards things that improve outcomes for students. And so instructional spending on instruction, academic support, and student services. So really the areas that we would want them to spend it on is where they tend to spend it. So that's a pretty positive outcome. Local funding matters also, and community colleges are one of the greatest innovations we've seen within the history of higher education by their ability to be nimble and meet direct local needs that are otherwise difficult for larger universities to meet. Their local focus allows them to focus on local economic needs, local demographic needs, local cultural needs, and the like. And local funding serves as a critical tool to ensure that local responsiveness. Early on, as these community colleges were created and funded, there was the theory that the funding distribution would be 1/3 tuition and fees, so the students, their families, 1/3 state funding, 1/3 local funding. That's not sacred, and it's seldom realized, if ever. Nebraska gets kind of close. But in most cases, we've seen an increased dependence on tuition and fees, while the other ones have shrunk in relative contribution. I think there's good underlying theory behind the one-third approach. It would be, I think there's some strong arguments for having that as a goal, even if it isn't always realized as local and state economies move up and down, and the capacity of students to pay may change over time, particularly considering, as Dr. Michaluk pointed out, the critical role of financial aid. If that's not adequately funded, it becomes more difficult for students to absorb the one-third tuition and fees portion. Where's Wyoming? So in this slide here, it doesn't include tuition and fees, okay? This is just the public funding portion, so state and local revenues. If that is isolated, the distribution of public sources of funding for the community colleges, currently state tax appropriations make up nearly 80% of public funding. So local appropriations, state endowments, and the like. So we're somewhat state appropriations heavy. That's not a bad thing. You actually could argue that's a very good thing, as it increases the capacity of the state to direct or influence the direction of the community colleges, particularly towards statewide strategy and goals. This slide, if you'll please notice the scale on the left, we're really zoomed in, right? It's 50% at the bottom up to 100%. And so even minor changes from 7 to 8%.
Mr. Danberg?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have a question from Representative Greer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll get a big flag to wave so you can see me clear down here. Hey, so on that prior slide, I had a question. So we use that term state appropriation. What is that? Just the direct appropriation in the budget bill? Where does local taxes or the mills fit in? I just want to make sure I understand that term. I saw it in an earlier presentation, this term state appropriation. I just want to make sure I understand that clearly.
So the 78% would be state dollars only from tax dollars, right? The local support and revenue would fall under the 19.8%. Is that answering your question? Oh, and I'm sorry, I failed to wait to be recognized.
Yes. So, Mr. Chairman, that
Representative Greer.
Yeah, I think that does answer my my question. I was just, because it said, and it's just state appropriation, it said tax appropriation, and maybe that's what made me concerned, because we use savings and investments, but those are just state dollars, direct state aid. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, should I continue?
Please proceed, Mr. Danberg.
Thank you. We see that the distribution really hasn't changed that much over time, is the point of this slide. So comparing Wyoming to national averages, if we look now, we're including tuition and fees. So you see that state support, both tax and non-tax support, from tax and non-tax revenue sources, local appropriation, and including tuition and fee revenues to the institutions, right? So nationally, we're on average, those states that have a local appropriation. So many states have no local support, right? But in this slide, we're only including those that have a local support. We see that we're not at that one third, one third, one third, right? We're at a 50% state support, 25% local, 25% net tuition revenues. Wyoming, you're close, you know, you're at 56% state support, 20% local, 24 net tuition revenues. You can see tuition. Oh, and let me see here. Yep, that's right. Tuition revenue. You can see your neighbor. We're down south of you in Colorado, where all your presenters are all located. Very tuition heavy. Prices out many students, frankly. Whereas you're at about 24%. You can see there is some variance. California, very low cost, very accessible, therefore. And so there's different approaches to state funding, right? State dollars to institutions can be appropriated via Base Plus, which is basically where the institutions or their representatives come to you, lobby every year, and you make a percentage change from the year previous. There's no formula, no performance funding, no other approach other than lobbying and you all setting the level. Another is a formula that's purely driven based on enrollments. So every new enrollment brings more dollars. Every decline in a student or an FTE is a reduction. Or you can use more complex formulas that may have enrollment as a part of it, plus other things. It could be enrollment mix, credit hours in certain subject areas, a cost of living increase, an inflation adjustment. There are some really complex formulas out there. One of them being performance funding, which is generally funding based on outcomes, such as each graduate gets a dollar amount of appropriation attributed to them. So each completion, you fund on completion. You could fund on completion in certain majors, right? If you determine those priority majors. And there are more complex and less complex performance funding formulas. Most adopt some sort of mix, and then there are some outlier approaches that are not that common.
I have another question from Representative Greer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, just so that I'm taking in the information the correct way, on these percentages and these figures, do they factor in capital construction? And I know a lot of CapCon, the community colleges starts at the ground level, the community level. But one area that is a large expense is the major maintenance component of it. Are those included when we're figuring these, or are those just operations alone?
Yeah, oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman. To respond to your question, this is a very unsatisfactory answer because it really depends. There are states' approaches to capital funding are incredibly diverse, and sometimes they're, as you said, it can happen at different levels. Capital appropriations are critical, and I don't believe in each instance of these percentages that it's included. And I can definitely speak more to state approaches to capital construction and major maintenance if you would like.
I think, Mr.
Representative Greer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think when I was, sorry, I'm always lagging the conversation, but I think I was just thinking back to those percentages of how we do it in Wyoming, and just curious, how those change and what those look like. We're trying to find solutions here, so we need to know what the numbers mean, what they are actually, and so major maintenance is definitely a large number. And then, you know, Capcom can always be shut down. We know that, but it's still a factor. I mean, we need to have good buildings, good facilities moving forward as well. So so I'm just trying to do is how do we look at this? Do we know what we're talking about 100%, and we're not just looking at 75% of the pie? Thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Recognize Representative Eric Barlow is here today with us, and he actually is scheduled to speak to us sometime at the end of the day, I believe. But Representative Barlow is actually in the audience, just for those who are by Zoom. Okay, Mr. Tanberg, let's finish your presentation.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry, I think there's someone else trying to get in.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tanberg, the presentation that was given to us, not the one that you're going through now, has got different figures. So if we go back to the map that shows the percent contribution, I think if you go back one or two, and I'm just trying to figure out what's changed, because that map says 2-year reliance is 24%, but the one that was sent out prior to, for the state of Wyoming, 24% reliance for 2-year institutions, but the one that was sent out previously says 14%. So I'm just trying to rectify what was previously submitted and what you're showing now.
Yes, and
Mr. Tanberg.
Thank you. I meant to bring that up. That was a typo in the 14. It's 24%, as you can see in this slide and this slide. So that was corrected. Thank you for bringing that up, and I should have done that.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
To the capital construction, I just confirmed that the data that we
Representative
have.
Freeman.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the speaker will probably comment on my question as we go forward. But I think that, again, adding on to what Representative Greer says, is in Wyoming, traditionally, or at least for the last 10 years, that 50% of all capital construction comes from the local community college. And so if you have, I don't even know how to put it in there, because if you, the figures that you showed before doesn't show that money was diverted from instruction for construction and matched by the state. So I really would like to know more about how capital construction is done in different states.
Mr. Tanberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the questions. I did confirm that the data that we have on the public funding does not include capital. Okay, so it's exclusive of capital. And I will say I've done some research on capital, state capital funding of capital. And it is incredibly diverse in their approaches. Sometimes the state has a reserved capital fund that then proposals for capital funding from either the governance structure or the institutions are submitted to, and they can only appropriate, then they divvy up that fund to the institutions. Other times, capital requests for capital funding go directly from the institutions to the legislature. And the legislature makes the decision as to how they're appropriated. Sometimes the capital funding goes to the state higher education entity, and they receive the request, and then they're divvied out. With community colleges, it can be even more complex, where local governments, either districts or counties or some mix, also fund capital projects and the state. And so it's fairly diverse in their approaches. We do find that sometimes even when the state has a capital fund or they give the money to a state higher education agency. Institutions will make appeals to the fund or the agency, but also circumvent the fund or the agency and go to the legislators directly seeking additional capital support. We find that capital funding is much more volatile than general fund appropriations, operating appropriations to the institutions. We also find it's far more political, that institutional lobbying has a larger effect on the size of capital appropriations than it does general fund operating appropriations. So just some basic context there. So Wyoming finance, it's a mixture of formula, performance-based allocation, mill levies, state support, and local support. I think you all are quite expert in this, but just to kind of put this out there as an informational slide. Some things that I want to point out about what makes the Wyoming community colleges fairly unique from other community colleges and systems. One thing is that the role that the community colleges play in Wyoming can in some ways be compared to what exists in other states as regionally focused public four-year colleges, which don't exist in Wyoming. And so the community colleges, they have residence halls in Wyoming, and they serve to not only meet what would be a traditional community college mission within their local communities, but also that regional focus, which is an added expectation and cost, right? They are also, as you all know, even far better than I do, you're a geographically large state with very geographically dispersed community colleges, which means you lose some of that economies of scale and the easy ability of institutions to cover the geographic needs of the state, which again is potentially an added cost. Likewise, the community colleges within Wyoming serve both a career and tech ed responsibility and also what you might call an academic transfer responsibility. In some states, the community colleges focus on that transfer function, getting an associate's degree and transferring to get, or ending at an academic associate's degree or transferring to go on for a bachelor's degree. And then they have the career and tech and vocational education in career and tech schools separate from each other. But here they often serve both responsibilities. Finally, I would just emphasize the critical local need that these community colleges play in local community college development. They are a cultural resource, an entertainment resource, an economic development resource, workforce training, and the like. And so the local communities that they're within heavily depend on them. And the aggregate impact, positive impact that these institutions have is quite large at a state level. Some examples, I won't hit every specific item within these slides, but I thought you'd be interested at a high level, and you can turn to these slides afterwards if you want to dig into the details of any one state. Idaho, your neighbor, has a funding formula, also has a mill levy that varies from locality to locality, and they're somewhat evenly distributed across state appropriations, tuition and fees, property tax, and other. Iowa is another more rural state. Their funding formula is quite complex, and they do levy a mill with a general one and then 8 special levies. Again, they're pretty evenly distributed across state aid, tuition and fees, and local property tax. And those three account for about 72% of total revenue going into the institutions. Again, I'll let you dig into the details if you wish later. Kansas has the most variable mills from moderate to very large. They primarily drive out funding via a formula, and they're more heavily funded by county and local appropriations, which sets them somewhat apart. Montana without the levies, but they have both a funding formula plus a performance funding system. And again, a pretty average distribution across state appropriations, local, and tuition. Likewise for Nebraska, they're driven off a funding formula. Oregon, which is interesting, they have a formula, but they have adjustments for the size of the institution, recognizing that larger institutions have an economies of scale that smaller ones do not. So some considerations for Wyoming. One thing that beyond these bullet points that I'd want to point out, you're all presented with a unique challenge right now where you have some really critical immediate needs and challenges, right? With the coronavirus, economic downturn, changes in oil prices and coal and the like, you have to immediately balance the budget while having the critical responsibility of emphasizing the long-term strategic direction of the state. And so it's a balance in your considerations and deliberations between setting up a process that'll work over the next 5, 10, 20 years of moving Wyoming in a positive direction, while immediately balancing the budget. And those are somewhat different considerations that have to be worked through simultaneously. Some advice is to honor the formulas even in difficult times. Likewise, I would encourage you to evaluate things from an equity perspective, equity across institutions and their specific needs, and then by the types of students that they serve, that underprivileged, underrepresented populations aren't being hurt by any decisions made. I'd also advise you to make cuts thoughtfully, that we recognize during economic downturns, higher education is often, their support is often having to be cut as states balance their budgets. And when I say do it in a thoughtful way, my recommendation is to look at the share of funding each institution gets from the state. And so let's say, as just a generic example, could be in any state, the flagship public research university gets, say, 10% of its operating revenue from the state. But a local community college may get 30 or 40% of its operating revenue from the state. A 10% cut in state appropriations to both institutions is felt very differently. A 10% cut to 10% of the operating revenue probably isn't going to really hurt that much. But a 10% cut to an institution that gets 40% of its operating revenue from the state is felt very acutely. I would agree with Dr. Michelou in that you need to always evaluate the relative role of state appropriations, financial aid, and pricing to students and how those interact with each other. Where a cut in appropriations may jack up tuition, where a cut in financial aid will mean that any increase in tuition is going to be felt more acutely and on. And make sure that those things are moving in the same strategic direction. And so with that, I'll just say on our website, we've got a ton of state higher education funding data at this link. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tanberg, for the presentation. Are there any questions at this time? Senator Landon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And David, thank you for all of that information. It strikes me, and maybe you could comment on this, given that you know other states, that the state funding piece more than likely goes to that equity piece that you referenced, maybe more than anything else. I know in Wyoming, we have college districts that simply cannot come to the table with much local funding. And so I guess my question is, are we unique in that, or do the other states use that state funding piece to provide that equity that you referenced?
Mr. Tanberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your question, Senator Landon. I would say no, you're not unique, and I completely agree with you that the state funding is really the one way that states can ensure some level of equity across institutions in their resources, right? I would also, there was a question, I think it was directed to Dr. Michalou during her presentations about the relative resources or funding per FTE comparing community colleges to universities. And that is a pattern that persists across states, that on average, the dollars per FTE within our research universities and our universities generally are higher than at our community colleges. And that's problematic because I've seen research that adjusts for upper level programs and students. That obviously research universities and universities general have upper level courses beyond 2 years, right? And those courses tend to be more expensive because then you get into your seminars, your major specific courses that tend to have fewer students per instructor by design and necessity. But even controlling for those things, we tend as a nation to underfund our community colleges.
Further questions by the committee?
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Getting back to that comment you just made, so how does Wyoming's relationship percentage-wise compare? I get it that generally the four-year institutions get more money. What I'm trying to get at is Wyoming consistent in what we do, the 3-to-1 ratio? And of course, you can't compare a state that's got 20 universities and 20 community colleges. We're unique in the fact that we only have one. I'm just trying to get to a point where to see how we do as a state, and do we really overfund our university or do we underfund our community colleges? Thank you.
Mr. Tanberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would need to pull that specific data to give you the most precise answer. And so I would divert back to what I said before. It is the pattern to provide that our universities have greater funding than our community colleges. I certainly wouldn't suggest that the University of Wyoming is overfunded. I don't think that's the case.
Well, there's a lot of people that appreciate that comment, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. So I would, if you could get that information and provide it to the committee, I would appreciate it. And, you know, I'm not suggesting that we cut the university and give the money to the community colleges. What I want to do is be sure that, given the nature of our revenue situation, the parity is fair and equal. And that's the challenge. That's what we're looking at. And I do believe our community colleges relative to our university are underfunded. How we get to where we need to be is another issue. Thank you.
Okay, further questions by the committee? Okay, sensing that we are ready to move on, I would like to thank Mr. Tanberg and
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Fulton and Ms. Scott.
Michael Schwank has something.
Who does?
Michael Schwank looks like he's trying to talk.
Mr. Schwank?
I believe we have one person for public comment for this particular subject. And I will admit them right now. And I believe it's Mr. Tate Mullen from the Wyoming Education Association.
Mr. Mullen represents the Wyoming Education Association.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. I want to thank the members of this committee for all their dedication and hard work, as well as all of the presenters we've heard from this morning. Their work is detailed and insightful, and hopefully very helpful in assisting this committee in their work regarding community college governance and funding. The Wyoming Education Association continues to advocate for education funding, not just the K through 12 level, but for our state's invaluable community colleges as well. The WEA recognizes and would like to reiterate some of the information provided by Dr. Tanberg and Shio, and that there are benefits to adequately funding our higher education institutions, including better enrollment rates, higher graduation rates, educational attainment, rates of completion, as well as the local and state benefit of economic development. Community colleges have long been the fertile ground where local and state businesses, organizations, and even the state itself have recruited leadership and employees from. Each of our state's unique community colleges offers benefits to their areas as significant revenue generators and the instrument that readies the next generation for positions available within their communities. Casper College's nursing program is an excellent example of our community college's ability to respond to local need and employment opportunities. Without a prioritized effort to fund community colleges, there will be large segments of Wyoming citizens from varying age groups who will have diminished education and employment opportunities. Lower education levels among citizens directly correlate to higher rates of unemployment or low wage work without benefits that put these individuals and their families at higher risk of financial difficulties. It also correlates to higher rates of substance abuse, negative law enforcement contact, and dependence on social safety net programs. Businesses across the state will also suffer as they have a diminished employment pool from which to draw from. This will have negative impacts on business productivity and quality of service or goods. Without adequate funding for community colleges, Wyoming's significant problem of youth brain drain will only increase as Wyoming students will be forced to seek their education outside of the state. The Wyoming Education Association also recognizes the significant budget crisis that the state is currently facing. We recognize that no sector of the economy, no service provision, no department will go unscathed. However, there are a number of opportunities for revenue increases that could help to insulate community colleges from the financial repercussions of the economic downturn. The Wyoming Education Association will continue to advocate for increasing state revenue streams by whatever means appropriate, including the raising of taxes to fund education, including higher education across the state of Wyoming. The Legislative Service Office provided a one-page handout on Wyoming's estimated tax capacity during the Education Committee meeting last month. This analysis demonstrated that the state has readily available to them the opportunity to generate over $800 million a year in revenue through a variety of taxation methods. We ask that the legislature give these options serious and considerable deliberation. At the local level, counties and cities have options as well, including implementing an increase in sales tax or an increase in mill levies for industrial, commercial, residential, or a mixture of these three in an attempt to raise funds for community colleges in that area. These local taxes may help to insulate community colleges through a local revenue generating mechanism. We are hesitant to advocate for increases in tuition, as it was noted by Dr. Tanberg, that there's a potential to price out those segments of the population who benefit most from higher education or certifications through our community colleges. This would run counter to the value of our community colleges. And with nothing further, I stand for questions at this time. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Mullen?
Mr. Chairman, I have one.
Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I get, and I get raising the revenues, but how do we at the present situation we find ourselves in, when we look at K through 12, where we have a 5 or 6% increase in their funding mechanism for the current year, yet we're asking our community colleges and university to get 10 to 20% reductions. And other than the revenue enhancements, it's a difficult situation we find ourselves in. And we all want to have the best for K through 12, yet when we have this difference and this differential between the two, it's just it stands out. And so a lot of people ask me that question, and I really don't have an answer that a lot of them like. What is your answer to that other than raising additional revenues?
Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, I just want to make sure that I understand your question correctly. You're asking what the discrepancy, if I can explain the discrepancy in what we're asking community colleges to do and what we're asking K through 12 to do in addressing this revenue shortfall.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I understand the differences. It's just that when we look at it for the parity, and being able to provide what we need to K through 12, but yet if we're not able to get any revenue enhancements and the substantial cuts to community colleges and university, it makes it an unequal situation. And so assuming there's no revenues, which, who knows what's going to happen. I quite frankly believe we should have a little of both, the cuts and the revenues, but who knows what might happen. How do you go forward without revenues when you have this disparity?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, thank you for the question. Well, without revenues, the short answer is without revenues is we don't. That's the difficulty of this situation. I think that there is, again, the notable difference in the funding models for community colleges, the University of Wyoming, and K through 12, in that what we are constitutionally obligated to do for K through 12, and then what that looks like for community colleges. The fact of the matter is that the community colleges and K through 12 are inextricably tied together, right? If we look at how they benefit one another with their dual and concurrent enrollment, we really need to be advocating for both. This is going to be our way out, and much like Dr. Tanberg talked about, that these institutions are the way to really kind of set in motion how we're going to get out of this and stay out of this in the future. But without those revenue streams, I don't see that happening for either K through 12 or our community colleges, and it does become, there is an issue of parity.
Further questions for Mr. Mullen? Okay, is there any? Do we have anybody else in the waiting room? Do we have any?
Mr. Chairman, there is no, sorry, Mr. Chairman, there is no more public comment for this.
Okay, I think at this time, do we have any public comment from the floor? We are ready to move into the 11 o'clock slot. We're actually just a few minutes ahead of time. It's about 9 minutes before 11. So at this point in time, we will move into new district formation overview and discussion, Campbell County and Gillette College. And our first speaker is Mayor Louise Carter King.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very, didn't know I had that loud a voice. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. We understand how important your time is, and we want to let you know how much we appreciate you taking the time to take public comment on this topic of such importance to us. I would like to welcome you to Gillette and to the campus of Gillette College. Everything that you see on this campus was built through the power of partnerships, both public and private. I would also like to introduce a few of the people that we have in attendance today that will be taking advantage of the opportunity to speak about our request to form our own college district here in Gillette. We have Rusty Bell, Campbell County Commissioner, Carol Seeger, Campbell County Commissioner's Administrative Director, Robert Palmer, Gillette College Advisory Board Member, and Paul Ladke, the CEO of Cyclone Drilling. Before we get started, I have a few things I would like to say about the importance of Gillette College to me personally and professionally. As mayor of Gillette, I wish nothing more than to have what is best for the city that I was elected to represent. Gillette College has become another bright, shining jewel in our community. From the Tech Center to Inspiration Hall to this facility in which we are meeting today, Gillette College is a beacon of hope for the future of Northeastern Wyoming. On a much more personal level, I am in a very fortunate position to be able to carry on the vision of my parents, Herb and Dorothy Carter. They, along with other progressive thinking individuals, some of which who are in the audience today, worked tirelessly and in the face of fierce opposition to bring Gillette College to life. From humble beginnings in borrowed classroom spaces to modular buildings to the first-class campus that we have today, what an amazing legacy for those that fought for so long to make sure our children had a place close to home to continue their education, and to give opportunities for others to come to Gillette and Campbell County to see how great it is to live here. This isn't the first time that Gillette and Campbell County have blazed our own trail. A little over 100 years ago, Campbell County came into being to better serve the residents that had settled in this area. Over the past century, that has worked out pretty well for us. We've shown time and again that we can be successful at growing our community. Having our own community college district would be a natural next step to further grow our community. I know that there are a number of other people that would like to speak with you today, so I would like to turn the floor over to Commissioner Rusty Bell. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for the mayor? Okay, thank you, thank you. Let's go ahead and have the commission come up with all speakers and sit at the table. So we would have Commissioner Bell, Mr. Palmer, Mr. Ladke, and Ms. Seeger. Okay, so members of the committee, this commission started meeting at the direction of Campbell County Commissioners to put together, first of all, the application, and then present that to the Wyoming Community College Commission. And then ultimately, they also spoke last week to the Community College Commission. This is the same group, and so I will turn it over to Commissioner Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and committee members for having this. Thank the legislature for creating this panel. They're creating this select committee. I think I'm Commissioner Rusty Bell. Sorry about that. And so very important to Wyoming. The lion's share of this work that's been done on this task force was probably by the three individuals sitting up here with me and others, and so I want to thank them. But I think just real brief remarks from me on how important it is that Campbell County be able to make their own decisions and I think that's what it really comes down to. Certainly if you're interested in why I think the annexation statute doesn't work for us, I can expound on that later, or why I think, maybe the current statute on what we're going through right now could use some work. We can talk about that too, but really dealing with what we have right now, the importance for the state of Wyoming and where we're going, and what I see for Campbell County over the next 1, 5, 10, and 20 years with mineral extraction, and how important with our current tax system in Wyoming, how important it is for Wyoming, for Campbell County, for the citizens of Gillette to continue to be able to train a workforce that's adapting to new things, whether it's rare earths, whether it's carbon capture, sequestration, utilization, whether it's carbon products, whether it's CO2 to products. There's a lot of things that are changing and moving quickly. We need to make those decisions here at our own community college on what kind of things that we offer and how we can train that skilled workforce that's going to be changing quite a bit over the next, like I said, 5, 10, 20 years. So I think that's a brief introduction why I think it's important. It's incredibly important to our businesses and our industries, especially knowing the investment that we've already put into our community, that not only do we get to make those decisions, but actually, do we even get to keep the lights on? So at this point, I think I'll turn it over now to Ms. Seeger. That works, or whoever, I guess. Okay.
Ms. Seeger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and other members of the committee. I don't know the familiarity with how familiar you are with the process that has to be gone through in order to establish a new district. So I thought maybe my role might be to give you a little run through of what we're experiencing right now, of going through that process of forming our own district here. Statutorily, it starts out by the submission of an application. Within the statute, it requires a resolution of a Board of County Commissioners. The minimal requirements are that you have to show that the area that's going to be encompassed within the new district requires an assessed valuation of over $100 million, and you have the number of K through 12 students must exceed 1,500. So that is the prerequisites that are established by statute that seems to envision the initiation of the application. There is nothing else. I think the statute might envision that there would be rules established by the Wyoming Community College Commission when Campbell County initiated the process by a resolution adopted by the Board of Campbell County Commissioners on July 21st of this year. The only thing that was in place were those requirements. Following the adoption of that resolution, within which the Board of Commissioners established a task force because they envisioned that there would be a lot of information that would need to be gathered in order to proceed with this process. The task force is comprised of Mr. Robert Palmer, who's sitting here at the panel, and Paul Ladke, Representative Barlow, Jerry Tysted, David Horning, Pat Carpenter, myself, and Josh McGrath, most of whom are in the audience today and serve in various roles, such as Chairman of the Advisory Board. Mr. Ladke's with private industry. Representative Barlow, I think, is obvious. Mr. Tysted also serves on the Advisory Board. Mr. Horning is the president of the Gillette College Foundation. Mr. Carpenter is the city administrator. Myself is administrative director at the county. And Mr. McGrath has been a leader with the Booster Club here and also serves with a real estate company here in town. The commission established this group to assist them with getting the application materials to the commission. We initially submitted the information that we knew by statute was required, and we were quickly informed that that would not be nearly enough information. We were aware that a needs assessment, or what's called a survey, would be required to be done within 30 days of submission of our application. Following that, then the commission has 90 days within which to act upon the application. Now you can see that this is a short time frame, and I will just show you that this is some of the materials that we put together in response to. We were told by the executive director with the Wyoming County Community College Association, we sort of were given an indicator of what might be required from a previous effort on Campbell County's part back in 1991 to form our own college district. And we took our lead from that and began gathering that information. And rules were adopted by the Community College Commission. I believe emergency rules were adopted. It was August 28th. And they fairly mirrored, sort of the process, the information that was required back in our first effort back in 1991. And just so you have an idea, there's a lot of information that you have to try to put together fairly quickly. We did that, we've submitted that material, and now WICHE has been contracted with to do the needs assessment and the survey, and they are currently doing interviews with various stakeholders. They have interviewed the task force.
I believe the Gillette College Foundation, they're scheduling one with the advisory board. So their efforts are underway. And I believe they have a target to have their report issued by the end of October, because the Community College Commission is set to consider our application on November 20th. So that's just sort of a brief run through of just sort of the process. Obviously, you can discern that it's a lot to get done in a short period of time. I will also note that the costs for this process have to be borne by Campbell County. At this point in time, we've just sort of issued a blank check because the situation is such that although we are paying for it, I know that I'd inquired regarding the costs with regard to the needs assessment. We're not involved in who is selected. So right now we were just looking at sort of a blank check on this process. I did refer WICHE to Campbell County. Had previously hired a company out of Colorado a number of years ago to help with Gillette College and its growth and development. Campbell County had invested in having what's called a higher needs assessment done by a company out of Colorado, and I did refer the commission staff to that particular report, thinking it might help save some time and cost with regard to this effort. But that is just sort of a brief overview with regard to the process as it currently exists.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Seeger? I think we are to Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer, you have a slideshow presentation? Not yet. And the presentation is up, at least on my computer. Do you have it, Tom? I've got it on my computer. You guys got it? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Again, I'm not sure I'm being heard.
And Mr. Palmer, we actually have the presentation on our computers. There it is up there now.
All right, so I'll proceed, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas.
And I think you need to turn on your mic.
I'll use this one instead. Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello. I'll speak really loud. How's that?
I doubt if our Zoom folks will be able to hear you. Are you on? We will have Mr. Palmer move down to Commissioner Bell's spot.
Thank you, Commissioner Bell.
Thank you.
Now I think I can be heard. Okay. Again, Chairman Wasserberger, Representative Nicholas, select committee members, thank you again for coming to Campbell County and to the Gillette College. As the Senator and Chairman mentioned, we do have a PowerPoint presentation that we had put together earlier for our public hearing process through the Wyoming Community College Commission. And so with that, we'd like to share some of those slides and talk a little bit about what we've accomplished and what we're hoping to accomplish here at Gillette College. So number one, the purpose, if we can move on to the next slide, please. Our purpose is the fundamental goal of forming a new community college district is to allow the existing Gillette College to continue to fulfill its role and our role as a Wyoming community college in meeting the challenges and student success strategy goals, free from structural impediments inherent in being merely a subordinate campus within a larger district in which we do not have and cannot have a meaningful role in our own governance. The community needs to preserve our community college and see that it continues to fulfill our original objectives of helping our students to succeed in their lives and careers and being an active and vibrant player in our community. Next slide, please. We see this as a natural evolution. We've had a great relationship with the Northern Wyoming Community College District and continue to have a great relationship. We've also been in existence now for over 50 years. This fall semester, we're celebrating our 51st anniversary of offering classes in Gillette and Campbell County. We started out in the old high school, original high school in Gillette, moved on to modular units at the old high school offering evening classes. And then in 2003, we opened our first campus building on this campus. We refer to it fondly as Old Main. In 2006, we changed our name from Gillette Campus to Gillette College. We adopted our pronghorn mascot in 2007, and in 2009, we saw our first resident halls. Our current headcount in FTE is almost 50% of the Northern Wyoming Community College District, and we serve over 1,400 Campbell County residents annually. Next slide, please. For those that have not had an opportunity to tour the campus and see what we have to offer, here are some slides and some pictures of some of the facilities that we have throughout the community. Currently, our enrollment is over 20% of the Campbell County School District high school graduates. In the last 10 years, over 2,600 students have achieved their academic credentials, their diplomas, or their certificates from Gillette College, with graduation ceremonies in Gillette and actually right here in this building. Next slide, please. Our finances for fiscal year 19 or fiscal year 2020, Gillette College budget was approximately $11.2 million. And you can see how that spread out between appropriation and local and tuition. The fiscal year 2020 Northern Wyoming Community College District budget is $32 million. Gillette College budget is an estimated 35% of the district total. And again, just as a reference point, we receive no direct dollars from the district. Those dollars that we receive are pass-through dollars for state appropriation and tuition, and the local dollars that are achieved here through the county, the city, the BOCES, private industry. Next slide, please. We did also put together a fact sheet, and we have that available to you as a handout. It's basically a one-page summary on the Gillette College, including enrollment, economic impact, and demographics, now and projected with the new district. And you can see that in a 2014 study, that over $64.8 million is returned annually to Campbell County from having the college here. It's an important investment and also an important partner. Next slide, please. So again, just talking a little bit about infrastructure and the facilities that we currently have on campus. Currently, we have 8 facilities totaling over 260,000 square feet of student academic and support programming. And as you're familiar, Wyoming Statute 21-18-103 addresses the transfer of property with the addition of a new district. Next slide, please. We all have a vested interest in this new district and moving forward. Our citizens, our businesses, our public entities, and I would say the state of Wyoming, with the investment that you have in partnership with the facilities here on the campus, have a significant interest and ownership in the Gillette College. And next slide, please. Again, we've had a mutually beneficial relationship with the Northern Wyoming Community College District, and we think allowing us to move forward, again, is a natural evolution. And it's good for Campbell County, Sheridan County, and Johnson County, and the state of Wyoming. It allows for local governance and continued focus on multiplying student success. And Chairman Wasserberger and Representative Nicholas and select committee members, in summary, our application for a new district is not looking to create a new campus or college. We've done that. You see it here before you. And we have proved that we can be successful. Instead, and more importantly, we are seeking approval to establish a new governance structure for Campbell County and Gillette College. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions by the committee? Okay, I think the last speaker is Mr. Paul Latke.
Chairman, thank you. I might have to switch up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I don't have to move.
Something happened.
All right, Chairman, Commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Paul Latke.
Swing it over a little closer.
Yes, sir. Is that better?
Yep.
All right. Lifetime resident, first time speaker. Campbell County is in a unique position regarding community college funding. To be able to, to be eligible for the state appropriations, we're required to assess the 4 mills. And if we assess those 4 mills in Campbell County, state appropriations won't be needed, nor would it be funded. To quantify this, if Campbell County were to assess 4 mills at the current valuation, that would be $16.8 million. Excuse me. The projected total budget as Gillette College as its own district would only be 15.1. So again, no state appropriations would be required. If Campbell County were to assess 4 mills at a projected future, because we understand our revenues are going to, our assessed valuation is going to decline, that would be $3.5 billion. And that would, those 4 mills would be 14 million. And again, it doesn't meet that 15.1, but once you add tuition in there, no state appropriations would be required again. Lots of different solutions out there. I know you guys are going to be wrestling around with this, but if we looked at a proportional approach in which if a district chose to assess all 4 mills, they would receive 100% of the state appropriations. If you just chose to assess fewer mills, maybe 2, you would receive X amount, some sort of a proportional amount to the mills that you are assessing. This solution would allow the districts that currently tax that full amount to continue to get their full state appropriations and doesn't harm the district, but still allows districts to receive a proportionate share if we do not need all 4 mills. We're kind of being hamstrung here. We want to be our own district. We can fiscally afford to be our own district, but it would put undue burden on industry and businesses to assess that. It's not needed. We're asking the district, asking the district to assess all 4s. It's not providing a full state appropriations is not an equitable formula. We're looking forward to work with you guys. Campbell County wants to be a part of the solution for college funding, but it needs to be rewritten from the current state. Thank you.
Any questions by the committee? Well, thank you for that presentation.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
And Senator Hicks, please.
Yeah, a question on this as far as the financing and if the Campbell County went ahead and did the 4 mill assessment, but due to the change in enrollment that those would now go from Northwest District into Campbell County, was there any economic analysis run on the impact associated with the existing district? Once you move those students and that tuition away from that district, what's the impact on that? So was there any analysis of that to see what that was?
Mr. Palmer.
Thank you for the question. I'll try and answer that, and I think we have other people that are in the room. Better?
Senator Hicks, can you hear? Okay, he can.
Okay, thank you. So again, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, thank you for the question. Very good question. And I'll attempt to answer that, and I think there's probably others in the room that can do a better job. This question came up at the last public hearing as well by one of the community college commissioners, and I believe that the needs assessment that Ms. Seeger alluded to earlier will address this more specifically in terms of that economic impact. Please remember that the tuition and student and state appropriation that we're currently receiving is based upon current Gillette FTE and enrollment and head count. So we're already receiving a portion of that through the district coming directly to Gillette College. The biggest impact is probably going to be, and President Tribally is here and can also address this, is going to be those shared costs that we currently have. And that's the reason that our budget we know is going to go up from the current 11 to a higher amount, because currently we have 1 president for the district, 1 HR, 1 IT. So we've had that built into our new budget formula. And in addition, the Northern Wyoming Community College District will have to address that, not being able to share that cost anymore with Gillette College, but having to absorb that directly. I hope that answers the question, or at least starts to address the question.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it answered the question, because one of the previous slides that was shown was about 43% of the enrollment currently in the Northwest District is actually on the Gillette campus. And so once you take that 43% out of there, which some of the other information we've shown, that tuition is funding somewhere between 20 and 24% of the cost of each one of the junior colleges, and you subtract out 43% of that enrollment out of Northwest, that's what economic impact is that going to have? That would be a substantial decline, 43% reduction in tuition fees. So I'm just trying to understand, if we move this direction, we need to look at the big picture and understand the implications across the board. So I don't know that it answered my question.
Mr. Palmer? I could take that. Well, quite frankly, the 43% of the students that attend Gillette College that are listed as students at Northern Wyoming Community College District, the 43% of that money flows through Sheridan College to Gillette. And that amount is $4.6 million. Other funding from WICHE, the county commissioners, the city council are locally raised. That money, the problem will be not necessarily the money that flows with the student, but the services that we have with Sheridan College that they provide Gillette College. So a lot of the administrative costs that help us here at Gillette College are costs that they keep that money in Sheridan to pay those employees. So there is a cost, you're absolutely right. But the money flows with the students, and the money will continue to flow with the students. The money that flows to Sheridan College for their students would do so also. I hope that answers your question, Senator. Okay, further questions by the committee?
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along that same line, and thank you for that clarification. I think it's really important to understand that the FTE impact to Sheridan is already being transferred to Gillette, so there will be no net effect relative to that. You know, the question I have is on the administrative side, the amount of administration that you already have at Gillette, will that be the same? What I'm getting at is, if we do split it off and all of a sudden, instead of having the budget at 16 million, it might grow to 20 or 20 million or some number. And then again, if do we have a full commitment by Campbell County to support it with 4 mills? I've heard that it's 1 mill, it's 2 mills, and of course with industry, that's a pretty significant impact, and they'll pay most of it. So is there industry support for this relative to 4 mills? I think you really need the 4 mills. All the other community college districts do it. So is there a total support for the 4 mills? Is that a given? We'll do that. And if not, then what do we do? And of course, right now there would be an inconsistency. If you do the 4 mills, the Campbell County College would be self-sufficient, receive no state funds, as I understand it, but over time that will change. And so we just need to be thinking about all this. The one thing I will say, Mr. Chairman, is congratulations to Campbell County. You've done an excellent job, and that facility it's just huge. It is incredible. And I think, at least from my perspective, we sure would like to see how we can work out a situation that allows that to continue to grow and flourish. But I just wonder about the impact of the state and the impact of Sheridan College. Thank you.
Okay, further questions? I think Representative Freeman had a question. And then Senator Hicks.
I'll just point out to the elephant in the room. I support the idea of Gillette being a independent community college. I think it would be good for Campbell County. I think it would be good for the state. But I don't think, after the testimony that we heard today, is that we carve out a niche for Gillette College that's different from the other 7 community colleges. I think we should take this opportunity to find an equitable solution to where that we continue to have a statewide system that all colleges adhere to. I am in Sweetwater County. There's 2 coal mines, there's uranium mines, and there's lots of oil and gas, and they pay 4 mills to support community colleges throughout the state. Campbell County doesn't do that. And I've heard lots of people that have said that there's an equity problem with that. So I think we should, I won't be here, but I think that there should be a system adjustment to where that we create a system to where that we don't, that we have 8 community colleges and we have one system. Again, we've heard today when you have multiple systems, that causes a lot of problems. And I don't think that we should have that or go down that road.
Thank you, Representative Freeman. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. A question I have, and I think Commissioner Bell kind of went through some of the rationales as the why to form the district. I'm just curious as if there was any other discussions. It seemed a lot of it was just the governance and the distance, and then the difference in just community needs. So I'm wondering, was there any discussion of setting up maybe a little bit different governance scenario versus just the full-blown go do another junior college district, community college district? I don't know who would like to take a shot at that, but was there a range of alternatives looking at, or was it even discussed as to have more input and more autonomy through the governance of the Gillette College and maintain the same district, or not?
Commissioner Bell.
Thank you, Chairman Wasserberger. Senator Hicks, thanks for the question. I'll try to answer as best I can. From my understanding is that there's 2 ways to go about this, and one was annexation, and one is creating your own district. That I don't know that there's another model for a governance that is outside of that in statute. And so the reason that what I believe annexation doesn't work is because we would be asking a board through annexation, we would be asking a board in Sheridan County to vote themselves out of power and ultimately give us the same power that they have now, which is to do whatever we want with their community. And so, it just didn't seem that is the way to go. Could there be a system where it would work? Potentially, but I think it would have to have some, some ability to have a board that gives each community some ownership, some uniqueness, but also have the ability to not say I'm going to single-handedly end your programs, even when you offer solutions from your community that will work. And so, that's what we did, and that's where we got to. And so I don't know that answers your question, but I don't think there's a formula right now in statute that really has that system any other way than annexation, which is pretty much laid out by population, and then you would have board members. So Campbell County, if that happened, we would have more board members than Sheridan County, and certainly they wouldn't want that in Sheridan County, and I don't blame them. They would be doing the same thing. And so, I just don't, honestly, this is the option that we came up with that was the best. The other thing with annexation, and I think the language in that is not up to 4 mills, it is 4 mills that you would tax. And to answer the question before, are we telling everybody right now that we're going to ask the residents of Campbell County and the industries of Campbell County to tax 4 mills? No, we're not. We think it's somewhere between 0 and 4. So there's that. I think that's something that's very difficult to ask our industries in the condition that they are in, given so much that they've given. And I understand Sweetwater County, everybody, all those industries that take things out of the ground have given a lot. To ask them to do 4 mills now, actually at any time, it's the reason it failed in 1990.
Well, I believe the statute actually states that it's up to 4 mills. The flip side of that is all 7 community colleges that have come into our state have voted in their local communities, in their county, approval of that 4 mill tax. And so that all 7 community colleges levy all 7 mills. That's the difference. Okay, further questions by the committee? All right, let's move on to Ms. Seeger.
If you would indulge me one moment, I have an apology to make, actually 2. I even wrote it down wrong in my notes. I'm so sorry. I referenced Mr. Pat Carpenter as being on the task force. He's a fine attorney here in Gillette, but he does not serve on the task force. It's Pat Davidson, who is the city administrator and serves on the task force. The other apology I want to make to my fellow task force members and those in the community who support Gillette College and the formation of a new district. I see a lot of everybody dressed in their pronghorn blue, and I want to extend an apology to my task force members and members of the community that I did not do that today. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, we're going to fire you as our cheerleader.
Yes, I think I deserve that.
Okay, next up, I think, is Dr. Walt Tribley.
This one works. You want to wash it? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Wasserberger. If I may, I also want to welcome you all to Gillette College on my behalf and certainly on behalf of the trustees. I'm the president of the district. A couple things. I think my comments are going to ultimately end up with much more about the context in which we are taking on all these very important and very serious issues here today, and that we have a funding issue. That is the big thing. We're talking a lot about governance and new colleges and all these things that are positive about our great state and what we could do in it. And the main issue is funding. And that's pretty much the context within which we're working. First of all, thank you for supporting a community college system. I'm going to take this off momentarily so you can at least see my lips. I need that help. You enroll 30,000 students in the community college system. Our district, the Northern Wyoming district, has 3 counties, obviously Campbell County, Johnson County, and Sheridan County. We serve 6,300 of those 30,000. The structure that you've heard this morning, obviously there's a Gillette College Advisory Board. The chair of that board, Mr. Palmer, sits with the trustees, has been invited into executive session, speaks to issues, but is denied a vote. Johnson County, Sheridan College in Johnson County, primarily, we have a physical location in Buffalo. They too have an advisory board. Their chair has the same permissions as Mr. Palmer does. That's Ms. Kramer's. She sits on the board. She has been invited, as Mr. Palmer has, to all executive sessions, including those dealing with budgets and budget cuts, but does not have a vote on the board. And to me, that's the main issue. I think the advisory board is incredibly engaged in what happens here at Gillette College, very engaged. In some ways, even more on a day-to-day basis engaged than a voting board of trustees, which we, through best practices, want them to be more governance and policy and less operational. I think the advisory boards I've seen, certainly the Gillette College Advisory Board, is vibrant, engaged, active in the community and active on campus. The issue is no vote. That to me is the main issue. Recently, I recommended to my board that they make a budget cut, and the board made the budget cut. The context of that was a 10% cut from the state, from the governor. That equated to my district, this college being part of it, to a $1.5 million cut. And that was half of what I was looking at in terms of loss of revenue from COVID. Enrollment-driven loss of revenue, single occupancy, shared bathrooms in dormitories, you're lost in terms of what those students would pay for food and housing, the loss of tuition, that was $3 million. So the estimated loss of revenue on July 1, when I made the recommendation to the board, was $4.5 million. The board took action. That action, of course, has been and would always be criticized. I can assure you that the action that was taken was equitable, and I believe it was fair, with the exception that all communities impacted did not have a vote. But it was equitable. We didn't do what some universities do, cut so-called outreach sites, sites far away from the power, greater than the mothership. I've seen universities do it. One of my own alma maters in the last Great Recession, Washington State University, when it was hit in 08, 09, they cut centers at a greater percent than the mothership. Still, we're sitting here today. I know certainly I've heard some of you, and I won't mention names, bringing up things like the other costs that we sometimes don't see, like maintaining these beautiful buildings. What a great deal to bring on a new community college where the majority of the infrastructure has already been built. And scheduled maintenance is expensive, but not as expensive as the whole ticket. Look at that. What a resource. So the main thing for me regarding Gillette College is if we bring it on at its own college, we need to make sure that it's healthy, like a child in our family, not just its first 2 or 3 years. Maybe some folks locally in the county or otherwise may have one-time funds to make sure it gets up and running. But we need to ensure that it's well-funded into the future. Gillette's one of the major cities in our great state. I see nothing more than a great rise in enrollment here, and this institution is primed and ready to serve those people. But back to the context. You know, we're really all on the same team in this room. You're on a select committee about education. That means something to me. I spent a lifetime in it. The people here are passionate about their school. What if we were working in a situation where we had adequate funding, full funding, that bringing on Gillette College didn't take away funding from Eastern Wyoming College or Sheridan College or any other college? To me, I think it would be an obvious yes. Why wouldn't we? So that to me is the major question. So I stand ready to work with you to take on that other evil question, which is revenue. I stand with you, whatever that means, to take on comprehensive revenue reform so we can serve our education properly. I've worked in 4 states, Florida, California, Washington, and Wyoming. I think that for a rural system, I believe this is the best system of governance, the best system of K through higher ed that I've seen. And we are going to spiral down if all we do is keep cutting. We can't cut ourselves out of a budget deficit. That next 10%, which I've been put on notice is coming, is $2.3 million, over $900,000 for Gillette and $1.3 million for Sheridan. And as tough as the decisions were made, the next round does not come with the cost of the program that something like athletics comes with. It gets real challenging. We have not cut workforce programs in Gillette. We did cut 2 in Sheridan, culinary arts and hospitality. So I also want to point out that our district employees have been doing what we can to provide resources to the task force here. We provided enrollment data, financial data to help ensure that the application has what we think are the best resources. Chairman Wasserberger and Advisory Board Chair Palmer did address that question about what this means to Sheridan College. And since we're in a zero-sum game, that is a real question. What's happening, Chair Wasserberger hit the nail on the head. We have the majority of the, and as did Board Chair Palmer, we have the majority of the infrastructure, the human resources department, the information technology, the chief academic officer, chief student services officer. Those functions are located in Sheridan. So on the plus side, we have actually a very efficient financial situation occurring here, where Gillette College is an extremely efficient institution, and that is driving lots of revenue, and the majority of the infrastructure, administrative infrastructure, is district-wide. So in that sense, it's a plus. We do not have a vote for all of this resource currently on the board, and I think that that's been made clear here, and I see that as the main issue. So if we could find funding, bring on a college, help the state move forward, I would ask, why not? So with that, Chair Wasserberger, if you have questions, you or your committee members, I stand.
Okay, any questions for Dr. Tribbley? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
I've got a question.
Thank you for your hospitality. Oh, excuse me, Dr. Tribbley, Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. So Dr. Tribbley, you've heard the earlier questions that were posed about what the real impacts would be or are to Sheridan. Have you monetized the impact to your operational administrative components if this happens? And if so, what are those numbers? And just kind of walk us through them a little bit.
Yeah, we present. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may. We presented some estimates to the Board of Trustees. The other thing we're doing is we're ensuring that there's an item on our board agenda where people can engage in this. So these are estimated costs. They don't have to necessarily play out. Right now, our overhead costs for the district are somewhere between $5 and $5.9 million. We think that and not all of the revenue that is generated in Gillette stays in Gillette. Some of it helps pay for that overhead. So we're estimating, with the current level of administration, about a $2 million hit that we would have to take on. Gillette College would have to bring on the entire administrative structure, which they're prepared to do. But their administration can look different.
Okay, further questions by the committee? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one more question.
Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you. I remember some of the discussion about the athletics and where Northwest decided to eliminate them. And then there was some discussion between Campbell and Sheridan counties about that. It seems to me, as I recall, there was a bit of differences on what should happen between Campbell and Northwest. Could you speak to that, please?
Dr. Tribbley.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I'm graciously trying to avoid some of that stuff, but here we go. It's a zero-sum game when you're asked to cut, when you have to cut a budget to make sure your ongoing revenue is meeting your ongoing costs. And that will always be the case in the institutions that I'm a president in. Athletics is one of the areas, so I'll quickly run through it. Your question is about a bit of the difference of opinion. So athletics was cut equally across the district. So all athletics programs were cut, including the athletic director. There's one additional athletic program in Sheridan, but the concept, the philosophy was the same. So actually it was a larger cut in Sheridan, but all athletics programs were cut. The armed police force on each campus was cut. Culinary arts and hospitality in Sheridan, the agri park operator in Sheridan were also eliminated or ripped, 16 positions. And then an additional 22 positions chose to take an early retirement incentive that will kick in now until December 2021. Those cuts on the expense side add up to about $4.5 million. So that was the magnitude of it. There was a very generous offer brought forward in Campbell County to try to keep the athletics programs here intact. And also being removed was Energy City Voices, a singing music program here in Gillette College. So that program, the music program and athletics were brought forward. It was approximately a 500,000 plus donation. It assumed the district would pick up the other half. But as I shared with the individual who brought that forward on the Friday before July 1, I needed an ongoing district-wide solution, not a single solution for a single part of our district. Now, so what that means is, would I, as a president, allow athletics to go in Sheridan, but not in Gillette? Would I allow them to go in Gillette, but not in Sheridan? So for me to accept or recommend the board accept that solution, it really would have cost me the other half of that. So let's say 500,000 there and $1 million in Sheridan to keep it going. And we're in a COVID environment. It wasn't clear to me if we were even going to have athletics at that time. So therein lies the challenge. The offer was genuine, very generous, and very well received, but I didn't feel I could recommend taking it. The board did not.
Any further questions for Dr. Tribbley? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony and your hospitality here today. I think next up is a group of people from Crook County. I think we're the group.
I think we're the group. I'm Jim Panel from Hewlett, Wyoming. Thank you guys for your hospitality and your time. Our biggest reason, this is Teresa Brown from Moorcroft. She's the principal in Moorcroft. I was the ag teacher in Hewlett for the past 10 years. Before that, I served on the school board, and I'm a lifetime resident of Crook County. Our concern, or not necessarily concern, but our interest in this is moving Crook County into the Gillette College area. Right now, we're currently tied with EWC, which is a fine college. It's just a long ways from Crook County. Our largest high school is the one in Moorcroft, which is 30 minutes from this campus. And we believe that a Gillette College could better serve Crook County than EWC just because of the locale.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Panel.
Hi.
Ms. Brown.
We've got a lot of support and stuff from the college. Anytime I've asked for anything, they're ready to help us. They give us tours. They work with our students in graduation. I have, because of the way that Gifted and Talented is funded, and we have 3 different towns. So by the time we split it up, we can't have a gifted and talented teacher. So what we do is walk to learn. So in other words, I have 7 kids in the K-8 building that are moving up. I have 1 student who is a 7th grader who is taking all sophomore classes except for STEM and band. So he's going to outgrow us and need to come over here. It would make more sense because of his young age to come over here. But I have 6 right behind him that are going to be in that same position. The resources here that we can get, especially through the medical thing, and also the ag department here, which is basically our kids are working kids. They're hands-on. They're going to be your workforce. So what Gillette College offers us fits our needs, is what I'm saying.
Thank you very much. Any questions for folks from Crook County? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Ms. Brown and Mr. Panel, I really appreciate your thoughts. And they've occurred to me for a long, long time with regard to our system out there. We have a high school about 18 miles from here that is served out of Eastern Wyoming College as well. That never has made any sense to me. Never mind if you go on over to Douglas and they too are served over in Torrington. And so, Mr. Chairman, I only say that we probably can't perhaps solve this equation today, but I think it's worth somebody at some time taking a look at this. And maybe we might ask our commission to take a look at how we're aligned and who reports where. If we choose to go with the support of Campbell County and Gillette College, it absolutely makes sense that a couple of our high schools up in that part of the world would align themselves with Gillette. So at the same time, I'm cognizant of the fact that we have a college down in the eastern part of the state that would impact greatly if we do this thing. But I just want to support what the speakers have said. I think it's a topic that's worth pursuing a little bit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Landon. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a question for Mrs. Brown and Mr. Panel. So what we're talking about right now is forming a new district, but Gillette College already exists. So how would that change your current scenario with Crook County, what you have now? How is just changing and making a known district going to change that relationship?
The one
Ms.
thing,
Brown.
thank you. The one thing that I think about is we have BOCES money also, which isn't a bunch because we're not a big producer. The biggest thing we have is the sawmill and the schools as far as employment. But the one impact that it would have is right now, and I used to be the BOCES person for our district, BOCES, sorry. And what we have to do is everything that Eastern Wyoming has is distance learning. Our kids are not distance learners, they're hands-on learners. So to have them come over and we could work it within our schedule. And here's the other thing, we're looking about impacts for the school districts too, financially. So each of our schools have an ag department. Each of our schools have, well, we're building a farm. We have a farm in Hewlett. We're building another outdoor learning opportunity for the kids because that's what our kids are, farmers and ranchers and miners and do that. So we need to have the hands-on opportunity. That is extremely expensive. If we could hop on and do our schedule where the kids would come over to the college in the morning and do their academics in the afternoon or vice versa, it would help our financial impact and the impact for the college because we could support them with students.
And it's important to note, I want to make sure that the committee understands the application that Gillette College has put in is only for the county of Campbell. It does not include any other counties. And so down the road, if you're looking at your state statutes for community colleges, the annexation process might be used to bring those counties in. If they should choose to, it would be their choice. And I think unless there's questions for Ms. Brown and Mr. Panel, I would like to go to Mr. Nyman, who is...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good.
On the big
Thank
screen,
you.
Jim, and it's really, you know, you're not as cute as you think.
Well, I have a little slide here. I could cut that out real quick if that would help. So, Mr. Chairman, all the committee, my name is Jim Nyman. I'm the president CEO of Nyman Enterprises from Hewlett. We have operations in 4 states right now, well over 500 employees. Skilled workers are a very important and very critical part of our company. Millwrights, mechanics, welders, electricians, and particularly now IT and electronics. They're hard to find, and we need to find a community college that we can work with or a trade school to work with to help encourage new students. We've had the opportunity to reach out, but it was difficult, but to reach out to Campbell County and start that process. It's just natural from my end that Crook County should be affiliated, and also Weston County, looking at the original setup of how the counties were affiliated with Gillette. I recognize when the old districts were set up, there was not a college in Gillette. So it was appropriate, particularly Crook and Weston being primarily agriculture, to be affiliated with Torrington. But with the Gillette College, I feel it's very important now to look at that and have some affiliation with Gillette. It appears that from my end, when I reached out, it was not appropriate under the current districting for the Gillette to reach over to either our business or to the schools because of the affiliation with Torrington. It being only 1 hour to Gillette and 4 hours to Torrington, 3 to Casper, I reached out and helped make those connections. So from my end, it's important that the state relook at that districting, and I think it's only appropriate for Gillette to have its own campus separate from what's going on in Sheridan. Sheridan has its own curriculum and missions. Gillette is more industrial and energy. Our mill is looking for a lot of the similar type skilled workers that you would find in Gillette. So with the downturn in Gillette, we've had an opportunity to pull some of those workers over and now also look at training through some of the high schools. So from our perspective, it's very important. Just a bigger view on Gillette. I've always kind of thought as Gillette as the full of energy, all the different energy sources that it produces. But what I've found is the real energy in Gillette is the people, knowing the different families there, the Ladkeys and all the different ones that help make things work. And you see what they've done for that campus and the community. So our affiliation that used to be more centered in Crook County going to South Dakota is now you see that transition starting to work back towards the community of Gillette and the business staying in our state. So I just strongly support that all of you take a look at the redistricting and look at adding both Weston and Crook into this. I don't want to do anything to hurt Torrington. I think the affiliation from an ag standpoint, and in some cases it might be Weldon or something else, can still be affiliated. But when you look at what's going to happen in Crook County and Weston, particularly with the foresight of the Gillette campus looking at the rare earths and maybe potentially helping there, I think it's a great opportunity for us to look at setting up a new district here. And I'd be proud from Crook County to be affiliated and help out. We are currently in small amounts helping support financially, and we would continue doing that for certain programs that would help us. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I would open up for any questions if there is any for me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nyman. Any questions for Mr. Nyman? Okay, I think the last person we are talking to is Misty Roberts.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question.
She's the Chief Nursing Officer at Campbell County Health.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Again, I'm Misty Robertson. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer at Campbell County Health. I'm here on behalf of Campbell County Health to express our support for Gillette College and to let you know that their continued success is essential to our ability to provide health care to our community. Just some stats for you. I am a registered nurse. We have 52% of our total registered nurses, and there are 341 at Campbell County Health, are graduates of Gillette College. 45% of our LPNs, licensed practical nurses, are from Gillette College. And 31% of our medical assistants are from Gillette College. We have what's called a residency program that helps new graduate nurses transition from students into practice. And we have hired, since 2012, 102 new graduate nurses from Gillette College. So you can see that our partnership is very important. We do partner with the college through the simulation lab. We offer clinical hours to many students, from 24 to 32 nursing students per year, and they come to care and learn to care for patients in our departments such as behavioral health, maternal child, med-surg, operating room, and ICU. We also offer clinical hours to medical assistants, so other healthcare professionals in some of our clinics. Again, we want to just express our support and let you know that their success is very essential to our ability to provide healthcare in this community. Thank you for allowing me to come today.
And thank you. Any questions for Ms. Robinson? And a special request from me, can I have a copy of your speech? I'd like to see those numbers and put those in my brain.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any questions from the members on Zoom? And Mr. Swank, do we have anybody in the waiting room?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have anyone in the waiting room. I just wanted to clarify that while they are not on the agenda for this topic, did you wish to hear from the Community College Commission staff related to this topic? Or
Did I
potentially
miss somebody?
one?
And we surely can.
Do you wish for that to be now or after lunch?
Mr. Swank, we're not hearing you.
I apologize. Would you like that discussion now or after lunch?
I think it's a perfect time to break and come back at 1:15. Okay. I really think it's just an absolute perfect time. So let's come back at 1:15 and we will discuss new district formation overview and discussion continue. Okay. Oh, Senator Bebo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is Jim Nyman still on? Did we lose him? Yeah, there he is. Jim, yeah, thanks for I really appreciate those comments coming from you as a businessman. The one question I have is, and you served our state so well as on the Board of Trustees for the university as the chairman as well. And do you have any thoughts or reflections on another college district relative to the relationship with our university? And, you know, you understand the funding issues we're going through. How do you see all that playing out? Thank you.
Mr. Nyman.
Yes, can you hear me okay? I think I don't think I'm muted here. I was fortunate enough to be in that 12-year period, which there's plenty of money in it, recognize it's changed. I'm right now sitting on a task force for the state of South Dakota, going through how to look at their 6 universities and how to save cost and save funding. As you know, Senator Bebout, one of the efforts that we jointly made was how do we better connect our community colleges to the university and look at one unit. And I know they're separate now, but I think we have a challenge there that is critical cost-wise. But after I get done over this next year on this other task force, I'm going to have a lot better perspective on how a state that's half again bigger is supporting 6 institutions, and how do we keep education as a top priority. When I see the community colleges running so lean and mean, I hope we find a way to give them continued support, because when you look at my experience was 51% of the kids don't go on to higher education, and the skill sets that are needed are gonna, a lot of those skill sets that are in the vocational area are gonna have to come from the community colleges. So I see that role increasing, not decreasing. How to do that with funding, I feel for everyone. And also at the high school level, I think we got to get a little more basic, recognizing what the high cost is there too. But I think that connection that this might help between Crook, Weston, and Campbell County, there could be an opportunity to have some cost savings overall when I look at both primary education, K through 12, and the community colleges that can help. And I I have had a chance to talk to a few of them in Gillette, and it looks like there's such a great affiliation between the high school and the community colleges and transitioning those kids. I hope we can further that even further. I hope I answered your question, Senator Bebout.
Thank you, Mr. Nyman. So now I think I had a question from Representative Co-Chairman Nicholas. Okay, and then back to Mr. Swank. And Mr. Co-Chairman, you're back.
No, you answered the question, so see you at 1:15.
Mr. Swank?
Mr. Chairman, I have one more announcement. We will have a different YouTube stream in the afternoon for those that are watching online.
Thank you very much. We will break until 1:15. Hope it's not 11:15. 1:15.